Hi, dear friends, some words of Torah for Parshas Zachor. Remember Amalek, cries out our special Torah reading of Zachor. Today, how could we possibly forget? In our Haftarah, Hashem commanded the prophet Samuel to implement this mitzvah formally and finally. Hashem commanded to wipe out every man, woman, and child and animal from Amalek. To be clear, this directive of complete annihilation was sui generis, a one-time commandment that has never been repeated before or since. The Abarbanel explains why God was so harsh against Amalek. When nations go to war, they usually do so for one of three legitimate reasons. One, to save their land from invaders. Two, to conquer additional territory. Or three, to seek vengeance from those who had harmed or humiliated them in the past. But Amalek attacked Bnei Israel for none of those reasons. The Jews never attacked Amalek. They didn't have their own land when Amalek first attacked them in the desert, and there was no history at all between Bnei Israel and Amalek, and certainly nothing that would warrant Amalek seeking vengeance from them. So why did they attack? The Abarbanel explains that there were two reasons. Number one, to diminish God's stature as the God of Israel in the eyes of the world, by showing them that the God of Israel could not stop Amalek from harming his chosen people. And number two, to diminish the stature of the Jewish people themselves, perhaps out of a jealousy dating back to the times of Yaakov and Esav. They sought to show that their great-grandfather Esav was indeed more powerful than the Jews' great-grandfather Yaakov. The Ramban explains that the mitzvah of Amalek was only to take effect once Eretz Yisrael was completely conquered and divided among the Jewish people, and this happened only during the reign of King Saul. The Radak further explains that this mitzvah was incumbent only upon the king of Israel, and thus the mitzvah only began with the first king, Saul. This helps us understand why no prophet before Samuel received this commandment to actively seek out Amalek and to destroy their people. What it doesn't explain, however, is why King Saul was the only king in Jewish history who was given this formal command to wage war with the actual people of Amalek. Why didn't Samuel also command King David to wipe out Amalek? Why didn't subsequent prophets of the first temple command their subsequent kings to wipe out Amalek? We might argue that once the kingdom of Israel was torn into two kingdoms during the reign of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, the mitzvah of destroying all of Amalek was put on hold since there was no longer a king over all unified Israel. We could further argue that our sages teach that once King Sancheriv of Assyria arose, he mixed up all the nations. That is, he dislodged each indigenous nation from its land, mixing and migrating people all over the region. This made it impossible from that time onwards to identify who was a true Amalekite. That's fine, but why were David or Solomon, who were kings of all of Israel and who lived before Sancheriv, not commanded to wage war and destroy all humans and animals from Amalek as Saul was? There was something unique about the first king of Israel, Saul. He was not chosen because of his coming from the Davidic dynasty, which had already been promised the monarchy from the times of our patriarch Jacob. Rather, King Saul was chosen because of his extreme righteousness. Our sages tell us that he was like a one-year-old child in his absolute purity from sin. They extol so many of Saul's virtues, including his kindness, benevolence, and extreme modesty. Amalek represents the opposite, the evil that exists within man: jealousy, resentment, envy, and malice to others who have more. Only someone who was completely free from those qualities could have been the person to wage war with Amalek. That person was Saul. The only problem is that such a person also has great compassion for all human beings, not realizing how tremendously damaging their evil can be. People who view the world with the innocence of a one-year-old child may believe that all people are essentially the same, and that everyone thinks the same and wishes only good for others just as they do. This simplistic and naive way of viewing the world is why such people don't think about others in terms of good and evil. They don't look at who started the war and for what reason, but instead will take the side of whoever has lost the more casualties. They are also more prone to have their heartstrings pulled by emotional propaganda. Because King Saul could not identify evil in himself, he could not fully recognize it in Amalek. and was thus compassionate upon the enemy of God. For this he lost his monarchy. We all know people like this, good and decent people, but who nevertheless get themselves and others in trouble through their refusal to recognize people for whom they are. David was different. He was not free from sin. He possessed a healthy amount of Yetzer Hara, of evil inclination, which emerged at different times during his life. He struggled with the evil within, which may have partially been a product of his pedigree, having Moabite blood in him, that made him a bit more cruel and aggressive than Saul. This inner conflict impelled David to write the most eloquent poetry about his love and devotion to Hashem, because he saw himself as a flawed vessel in need of salvation. Even though King David succeeded most of the time in sublimating his evil inclination, he could not be tasked with destroying Amalek. So long as some Amalek still lingered within him, he could not be expected to eradicate Amalek. That is why from the times of King David and on, no king of Israel has been able to fulfill this mitzvah, because if you cannot annihilate the Amalek within, you cannot annihilate Amalek entirely. One modern-day Amalek that we have today is Hamas. They have no rational reason for seeking our demise, since they were not the indigenous people of the land. This is truly a holy war for them, a war that is predicated on the doctrine that land once lived upon by Muslims cannot be left to infidels, but is rather Dar al-Harb, the land of the sword. In their eyes, Israel must constantly be attacked to show that the God of the infidel is not as strong as Allah. How foolish they are, and that we all worship the same God who wants mankind to live in peace. But such is the way of Amalek, caring more about the other's demise than the building up of themselves. Since King Saul, there has been no one capable of completely wiping out Amalek, and all we can do to fulfill Hashem's mitzvah is to destroy those Amalekites who attack us and seek our destruction. In order to succeed, we must try to emulate Saul's righteousness while at the same time possess David's ability to recognize the evil of the enemy for what it is. But we must do so steadfastly and with great conviction, like we are witnessing within the young men and women of the IDF. They make mistakes just like any other army, but they are waging a battle with the compassion of Saul and the fierceness of David. We cannot afford to make the same mistakes as Saul. As Samuel told him, Hakaton ata be'einecha, are you small in your eyes? You are the head of the tribes of Israel. When we recognize our greatness that comes from our great sensitivity, we will prevail. And so, dear friends, may Hashem continue to grant us strength and perseverance to bring all our hostages home and to end the Amalek of Hamas once and for all. This will bring us one step closer to the redemption. May we see it b'mheira b'yameinu amen. Here's wishing you a good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, and Purim Sameach.